What's going on, everybody? All right, now, thank you to everybody for all of your well wishes with my surgery last week. Things went well. I am recovering well. The main thing I'm continuing to struggle with a little bit is my throat got jacked up. You know, when you go under, they stick those breathing tubes down your throat and jacks up your throat. So if I go into a coughing fit or I start to kind of lose my voice a little bit, that is what's going on. Otherwise, the road to recovery has been fantastic. And to be honest with you, I feel better than I thought I would at this point. So looking forward to that. A lot of good things coming up. Strongsville. Man, what are we, 2.5 weeks away? Something like that. I cannot wait to see some of my favorite people at that. Tonight, though, tonight is my third live stream. 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. Right here on this channel is going to be Midlife Live number 3. Again, I'm doing one of these a month this year to see how it goes. And so far, it has exceeded expectations. And what are expectations? Expectations is this something that people want? Are people going to come out and participate, watch the live stream, be a part of the action? And so far, that has absolutely happened. And I'm hoping to build on that and continue tonight. So please consider coming out to that. It's going to be really fun. Remember, I've got 3 really great guests. I got John Mangini. I've got Dylan, Double D Vintage Baseball Cards. And I've got my guy, Adam, Splendid Sports. 3 really great guys with strong opinions. And we're going to be talking about grading. And that kind of ties into our question right here from last week. And the question that I asked to all of you was, with everything happening with grading, is it time that we start thinking about trading down in grade? Is it, if you've got cards in 7s and 8s and 9s, or even 10s, is the price of those cards getting to the point where you're thinking, I don't need a 9, I don't need an 8, I can get a really nice looking 6 and sell my 8 and buy a nice looking 6 and have some extra money to spend elsewhere? Is that something that we're starting to consider? Now, as always, lots of great responses. Some people said yes. Some people said no. There was everything in between. And I am excited to share with you the responses. And I have a lot of opinions on this. And I genuinely can see both sides of the story. I genuinely could see why somebody would want to keep high-graded stuff. And I can understand why people wouldn't. You know, if you look right now at the prices of high-grade cards, 9s and 10s especially, the price is so high. Now, will it stay high? I don't know. But the person who went out and bought the high-grade stuff a few years ago is absolutely killing it when it comes to value. So as a collector, some of us may not care. We just want a nice looking card. But if somebody's looking at the value and the projected value of what's going to continue to happen or what could continue to happen, it doesn't feel, it absolutely is the case that there is a high premium on high graded cards. So do we cash in on that, or do we think that's going to continue? That's really part of the question, and we're going to look at your response to that, starting right here. Now, some people said trade down. Heck yeah. This first one says, for this week's question, I would definitely consider downgrading. Let's say I have a card and I just want a copy of the card that I want to have and be graded. I like the way they display in their graded case. I'm totally willing to downgrade to a lower grade and maybe sell off the higher grade to someone for whom it is more valuable than it is to me, and take that money and spend it elsewhere. Maybe because I found one that I think is better than a 5 or something like that. Or simply, I don't need this to be in a 5 holder. I just want a legit copy of the card. For instance, I have a 1966 Mantle that came back with a higher grade than I expected, SGC 4. I seriously considered selling it and then downgrading it because I want my mantle in my collection, but it doesn't have to be a card with that high of a grade. I decided against it, and that card was a gift from my parents about 30 years ago, and I'm so sentimental. I also have a 1986 Jerry Rice SGC 7 as well that I've considered downgrading, but the price difference isn't great enough to justify it to me. But in the question is, are you willing to have you considered? The answer is yes. Though if the question is, have you ever? The answer is no. This next one says, hey Greg, long time, first time, love your show. It's really helped me in getting back into the hobby 2 years ago, after being out the standard 30 years or so. With regard to trading down in grade, I've been wrestling with this for a few months now. I traded down my 86 Fleer Michael Jordan rookie card for a clean raw one and got cash for the difference. Thinking about doing a similar thing with my MJ Star 101 BGS 7.5. Maybe trade it for a BGS 5 plus cash. I always wanted those cards as a kid, and getting to own them feels cool, regardless of the grade. The extra cash can and will be turned into other cards I'd like to get. And finally, this one says, learning from many card collectors truly helped me collect cards that I enjoy. I'm a disciple of the school of Dylan, Double D vintage baseball cards. So my answer for next week's question is a resounding yes to lower grades for higher eye appeal. I can't wait for my guru to come onto the Midlife Live panel. All right. Really interesting responses. Now, how did this all come to be? Where did this question even come from? What is the thought behind? What's the origination of this? Well, it goes back to first. I had a conversation with my buddy Chris from Missouri during the National. At the National, there was this huge area of like food trucks and stuff, and we were all sitting there. And I was sitting with Chris, and I was asking him about the show, and he's showing me all of his pickups. And he shows me this whole slew of cards that he got. And he's telling me I didn't spend anything on these cards. And I'm like, what do you mean you didn't spend anything on these cards? He said he took a 1950 Bowman. And Chris, if I'm getting the story wrong, down below in the comments, share with me what was right. But what I remember is he had a 1950 Bowman Jackie Robinson. It's an awesome card. Okay, one of the best Jackie Robinson cards, although all Jackie Robinson cards are cool. And I want to say it was in like a 4 or a 5. And what he did is he traded it to a dealer who had a nice one and a 1. So he traded down from like a 4 or a 5 to a 1. And then that freed up a whole bunch of money. And then with that money, he added a bunch of cards. And he was just absolutely over the moon about this deal because he still had a Jackie Robinson. And now he had all these other cards that were on his list of cards that he wanted to accumulate and add to the collection. So by taking the capital, the equity really, that he had in this higher grade card and then trading it out, it's almost like a reverse mortgage. You know those products where somebody owns their house outright and then they're kind of low on money later in life, and so they do this thing where the bank slowly buys it from them and is paying them monthly for gaining ownership of the house. It's downgrading the house. Once your kids move out, what do we need this huge house for? So you take this huge house that you live in, you buy a smaller house, you then take the extra money from the extra value of the bigger house that you had with a family, and now you have all this extra money sitting in the bank that you can do stuff with. You can go on vacations, you can buy cars, you can, whatever it is. Now, whether or not you believe that philosophy or you think that's a good philosophy or not, that's basically what Chris did. Is he took this higher valued item, and it's valued higher because the higher condition is more desirable to enough people that it's worth more money. And then he takes that, he gets the card, and he adds all these other cards. And so he said that, and it really got me thinking. Now, this was, this last National in late July. And And then I see, this video that Orlando, my buddy Orlando of A Collector's Dream, did recently, where he's talking about building up his Strongsville budget. And what does he do? He had a 1959 Topps Bob Gibson in a PSA 8. Now, this is a Bob Gibson rookie card in an 8 grade. And, it was a nice card. It was noticeably off-center. But Orlando was like, I don't need an 8. I don't need an 8. I'd be okay with like a nice 5. And especially with the way they're grading right now. A 5 nowadays is a really, really nice card in most cases. And he even said himself, he's like, yeah, if this card went in for grading out, probably wouldn't get an 8 again. So if I can cash out at 8 value, and so that's what he did, is he cashed it out. He ended up selling it, and he got really high value on it. And then he ended up making a deal, and he did a whole video on this. Go check out that video of Orlando's. And it made perfect sense to me. It's like, why have this 8 if you're okay with a 4? And now you have all this extra money to go buy other things. And he ended up buying a really nice Satchel Paige Retorado card. And he has all this cash to take to Strongsville. Makes sense. Then my guy Adam, who's going to be on tonight's live stream, and I'm going to bring this up with them tonight. He had a 1986 Fleer Larry Bird in a PSA 10, and it was off center. Now, what are the centering guidelines from PSA now? Might be a topic that comes up tonight as well. But, it's either 55-45 or 60-40. We don't really know. PSA says it's clear as day, which it isn't for most of us. But anyway, the point is, it was an off-center PSA 10. He sold that for thousands. And then he turned around and he bought a really nice, well-centered 7, which he feels, and I agree, looking at the pictures, is nicer. So now he just freed up thousands of dollars to buy other cards for his collection by taking the 10 and getting a 7. Now, that's the whole concept. And seeing, again, I've mentioned this before. What happens for me is you see, I learn from others. I learn from what they say. I learn from their experiences. I learn by watching what they do. And I'm watching 3 collectors that I really respect in Chris, Orlando, and Adam. And they are trading higher grade cards down for lower grade cards that they think are essentially the same or better in their eyes and in their collecting, thought process. And they free up all this money to go buy other stuff. And so is that what we should be doing? Now, there's nothing we should be doing. Let me just say that. There is not a right answer or a wrong answer. That's what makes this interesting. The thing that makes the whole hobby interesting is we all have different players. We all have different teams. We all have different strategies. We all have different preferences. Do you want graded? Do you want raw? Do you want this company? Do you want that company? Do you want centered? Do you want registration? Do you want surface? Do you want wrinkles? That's the fun part, is there are an infinite number of possibilities of where you can go in the hobby. But that process, that thought, and like the second response of the 3 I just read, where he took a high-grade Jordan and sold it, bought a nice, clean, raw copy, and then it freed up cash, and now has the Star 101 card, which is a really expensive card, in a pretty high grade, sell that, buy a lower grade, still have the card, but then freeing up a ton of money to buy something else. Now, part of it might be the whole concept of, well, are you collecting for the enjoyment of owning, or are you buying and holding for the thought of potential future value? And that could open a whole different conversation. If your collection you look at as an investment or more of an investment, then that might lead you one direction over another, versus if you're a collector who just likes having cool cards that have history to them, then that might lead you down a different path. And again, that's a whole different can of worms, but it absolutely might be part of what leads you one way over another. I have many friends in the hobby who absolutely think buying high-end, sharp, high-grade cards is the way to go. And holding those long-term have way more potential than a lower grade, decent eye appeal copy. The specimen that is a finer specimen, according to the grading standards, according to, the little details when you look at it under heavy magnification, a lot of people feel has way more upside potential in value. And so if value is a big part of what you're doing and you believe that, then why would you trade down? Why would you trade down for an inferior item when the superior item has so much more upside? These are the things to think about. And these are the fun things for me to talk about. I could show cards all day. That's great. I like looking at cards. I could scroll through pictures of cards on auction sites and eBay and stuff. And that's great too. But these philosophies and these kind of the semantics of what to do next and how to do it and this person's thought process and that to me is super interesting. And it's why I absolutely love these discussions. So definitely a lot of the responses, the majority of the responses from this week were, yeah, if you have a high grade card, you should probably sell it and then buy a lower grade card and then use that extra money, that extra capital, that extra equity to go buy other stuff. That is the way to go. And I totally understand that. But there are some people that are like, that's a big mistake. And I understand that too. And that's the fun of it. Let's look at a few of the other responses right here.
Now, some people said, who cares about grades anyway? This first one says, great video. For this week's question, I don't really care about grades. I always go for eye appeal. I'll definitely take a nice 8 or 9 instead of a 10 and save a bunch of money. Power corrupts, and PSA is getting too much power, if you ask me. My dad mentions I'm all about upgrading all of my cards. Having once owned a PSA 8 complete 1960 baseball set, my thoughts have changed just like PSA standards have changed. To me, when I say upgrade a card, I don't mean a higher number on it. I mean one with better eye appeal. I've sold almost all my cards that, in my opinion, weren't centered well enough to have good eye appeal. I don't mean a card that is 5149 centering like your friend DD. Pleasing to the eye is now everything. I have a 56 Campanella that is dead centered, but it is a SGC 3 holder. It has a tiny 1/4-inch wrinkle on it that you can barely see, if at all. If 10 people held it in their hand, many wouldn't be able to see it. I was literally thinking of selling it because it didn't fit in my top 50 cards. The more I looked at it, I decided that I couldn't sell it because it was way too beautiful not to keep. If someone wants to call that downgrading, then so be it. To me, everything I've done is upgrading. And this last one says, my answer to your question is twofold, and is yes on both counts. A, since the TPGs have stiffened so much in recent years and have significantly moved the goalposts, going down to a lower grade really means staying the same. Yesterday's 5 is clearly today's 3, so downgrading is really a non-issue. B, yes, but go all the way to raw and ungraded cards. This obsessive need to have someone else's opinion adorning your slabs is irrational and unnecessary. If you let yourself be the judge, you'll be more enrichment by enjoying your cards in their original natural state. You said you valued the wisdom of older long-term collectors. So there it is, my friend.
All right, some great comments there. And my dad's was one of those. And And I think my dad's comment absolutely hit it on the head, at least for a lot of us who are in this as collectors. And the investment part, or the future value, or the value at all part, is secondary, which is, I want a nice looking card. And so, yeah, I want to upgrade. But the upgrade doesn't mean the number. The upgrade means the enjoyment of looking at that particular card. If the card is nice looking, and it's nicer looking than a higher graded card, then the grade doesn't matter to a lot of us collectors. A lot of us collectors just want cards that when we look at them, we don't look at it and go, like, yikes, We don't want something, I think it was my buddy Dan of Dan's Vintage PC said, you don't want something that once you see it, you can't unsee it, right? If there's something on the card that's so distracting that you can't enjoy the look of the card, then that's what I recommend people stay away from. If there's something you go, I can't, it's just too bad of that, then that's something to stay away from. But my dad's comment was really pretty spot on. Yeah, I want upgraded cards, but that doesn't necessarily mean higher numbers. Now, my dad said something years ago to me when he started selling off his 1960 set, which he referenced there. He referenced this and he said, yeah, I sold my 1960 set, which was a PSA average over 8.0. Now, he had a 1960 Mantle in a PSA 9. He had a 1960 Willie McCovey rookie card in a PSA 9. He had a 1959 Mickey Mantle in a PSA 8. He's had a 1958 Mickey Mantle in a PSA 8. And he ended up selling them. And you say, why? Why would you sell those cards? Why would you sell them? That's what, a lot of us would think. Why would you sell them? And he had such a perfect response. And it's such a matter-of-fact response. And when you think about it, it's really simple. And he said, well, those cards became more valuable to someone else than they were to me. Now think about that for a second. If you've got a card in your collection that is more valuable to a potential buyer than it is to you, that's when you should maybe think about selling. And so when you buy a card for, a couple of $100, and all of a sudden it's worth $10,000, and you're like, I wouldn't pay $10,000 for that. I wouldn't pay $10,000 for that copy over this copy. Then maybe you sell. Now, that's not really the collector mentality of, oh, well, I'm going to cash in my profits. Or is it? Isn't the collector mentality of having a collection of cards that you like to look at, and as many of those really nice cards that you like to look at as possible? So if you've got a really nice copy of a card, and you don't really need one that's that nice, but you bought it because it was nice. And this really happened when grading kicked in. Because when I started collecting, when my dad and I were going to shows, grading wasn't a thing yet. And you'd started to kind of see them start to trickle in the mid-90s, but it wasn't really a thing, so everything was raw. So then as soon as some of the more valuable cards started getting graded, you're like, whoa, this thing's an 8 or this thing's a 9 and now it's worth how much? Like, that's crazy money. My dad had a Joe Montana rookie card in a 10. In a 10. And you say, it's basically perfect. This one was actually like perfect. And when so I've told this story before. Quickly, he bought it raw. He submitted it. It got a 9. It sat in a PSA 9 holder for years. And it bugged him because he's like, there's nothing wrong with it. There's no reason it shouldn't be a 10. Why is it a 9? So finally he said, I'm just going to submit it. He's not going to crack it and submit it. He's just going to submit it to be regraded in the holder. And PSA called him and said, well, we've got good news and bad news. The good news is your card is going to get a higher grade. The bad news is we have an upcharge for you. And he said, okay, I'll gladly pay it. Now, when you have a card in a 9 and you resubmit it and it gets an upcharge, that means that it went to a 10 because they don't have 9.5s. So he gladly paid that. It came back. It's the same card he's had for years. He loved the card. It was a beautiful card. It's the same 9 that's been sitting in his collection for years. But as soon as it had the 10 on it, it became more valuable to someone else than it was to him. So what did he do? And this is years ago. I mean, this is, I'm just making this up, but 6 or 7 years ago, maybe? And it gets the 10. So what did he do? He sold it. It came back. He immediately sold it. And then he went out and bought a 7. And he has the 7 and it's beautiful. I totally understand that. When a card becomes more valuable to someone else than it does to you, and that card, when it was in a 9 holder, you know, and it's maybe worth, I don't know what that's worth, $1,500 in a 9? So it's worth $1,500 in a 9. You go, yeah, that's worth $1,500 to me. But then because PSA changed their mind and they've decided it's now a 10, and the perceived value of others of a 10 is like $10,000. Oh, it's not worth $10,000 to me. Maybe it was worth $1,500 to me, not worth $10,000 to me. That's when it's time to move it. And then you move it, and then you buy a really nice looking one. Now, is that 7 as nice as the 10? No. But is it really nice? Yes. Does he still have a Joe Montana rookie card? Yes. And you cash out a lot of equity because somebody else values the 10 way more than my dad valued that number on the top of the slab.
Now, some people said, well, why would I trade down? My guy Larry says, wow, am I looking forward to that panel. All great spokesman of the hobby. Hernia surgery makes you sore, but survivable. Good luck. What an interesting question this week. It is obvious that grading has changed, especially with PSA. My vintage cards from the 50s and 60s that I obtained in past years would grade no less than a 5, and mostly in the 6, 7, 8 range. Pack fresh was more important to me, and some lack today's so-called eye appeal. The way PSA is grading, there is a good chance that the cards in my older holders would drop at least a grade. Am I going to trade down? No, as I am keeping those cards. My eye appeal is different than others, as registration to me is most important. But the high cost of cards and changes in grading are forcing me to look at lower numbers. Finally, I have never worried about numbers with pre-war. His next one says, another great video, Greg. Good luck with your surgery this week. I really appreciate your comments on being an introvert and sometimes putting yourself out there to follow your hobbies and interests. I am in a similar boat to where you were last year. At the urging of my wife, I booked a trip to Strongsville for next month. It's normally not something I would ever do, but I'm excited. I hope to see you there. For this week's question, I don't think I would ever consider trading down in grade from a card that I have, especially if that card comes with a story. In general, I'm fairly ambivalent about grading. I view cards as historical art, and I think slabs can serve as a very nice picture frame for some of them. With that being said, while I wouldn't trade down on a card, I would 100% reholder to a newer slab. Some cards just need new tuxes. And finally, my buddy Don says, this sounds like a trick question. If you bought the card you like, regardless of the grade, I generally consider it put to bed. Now, there may be reasons I may consider it, especially if it was going to somehow help a friend with his registry set or something, or if you really needed the money. But in general, I say live with the decision you made. Why trade down?
All right, couple good things came up here, and I want to talk about them. The first thing I want to mention is the story behind the card. Sometimes, absolutely, the story behind the card adds value to you that makes a card more valuable to you than it does to others. So, in my opinion, there are times that, regardless of the grade, it doesn't matter if it's a 1 or it's a 10, if it's a card that means more to you than to someone else, that's a time to definitely not trade down. And that was one of the things that was pointed out is, it's just like the example I just gave a minute ago with my dad. That Joe Montana rookie card goes from a 9 to a 10. The value to others now is way higher to others than it is to my dad. But there are some cards that the story behind how you obtained it makes it where that card is more valuable to you than it is to others. My easiest example to point to is my 54 Topps Ernie Banks rookie card that I got at the National, PSA 5. I mean, if that card goes way up, it'll never be worth more monetarily than it is to me in meaning. And so that would be a card that I wouldn't sell because it means it's worth more to me in that grade and in that condition and in that situation than it is to anyone else. Those are not cards you trade down. Those are cards that when you get rid of them, you regret them. So you always have to look in the mirror and go, if I trade this, or if I sell this, or if I get rid of this, I move on from this, is this one I'm going to regret? Usually the ones that we regret, usually the ones that we regret are the ones that have a story behind them. And the meaning behind the card goes way beyond the monetary value of the card. So that is absolutely something to always be considering. Maybe you bought a card for $100 and now it's worth $1,000. You go, I got to sell it. It went up $900. Well, that doesn't mean it's not worth more than $1,000 to you because your grandpa gave it to you. Because you got that for your 8th birthday from your aunt who was your favorite aunt. Yeah. So those are all things that we definitely want to consider. So sometimes trading down or moving down in number or in value or in price doesn't make sense because the monetary value is not at par with our personal perceived emotional value of that card. And then Don makes a good point. He says, why would I trade down? I mean, unless I needed the money, why would I trade down? Now, first of all, Don has a really amazing collection. He has most of the cards in his football card collection that he wants. Most of them he has. So moving out of a big card and down to get a different card, I mean, if you don't have a lot of holes in your collection, if there aren't a lot of empty boxes and there are a lot of check marks, then it feels less important to free up some of the equity you have in a card to go get more. It's a lot of us who have like, oh man, there's 1,000 cards out there that I still want. We're the people who are more likely to sell a high grade so we can move into some other things. That's also something to consider. Just because something is worth a lot doesn't mean you should sell it. I'll go back to Orlando. Orlando has some absolutely amazing cards. Some of his really high grade Goodwin Champion cards are worth a freaking fortune. A fortune. He's got the anonymous Mayo football card, which is like super rare, worth a lot. His 52 mantle is worth a lot. And there are cards Orlando wants, but It's not worth moving out of those cards to him. Will they someday? Maybe. But some of those cards are literally the highest grade ever, or one of the few known existences, or the nicest copy ever. And you're like, no, I like having that one. I like having this really nice version of it. These are just ideas on, what are things that we could consider at times in our collecting. And to me, they're just fun conversations. These are the sorts of things that, when I'm sitting around in Strongsville at the YouTube Hangout or the For Collectors Trade Night, and I'm just sitting there, and there's a table of guys sitting around, and we're looking at each other's pickups, and you say, so, I don't know, like, what are some other cards in the show that if they caught your eye, you might be interested in, hey, you got this one in a 7 that you brought to trade night. Would you sell it? Would you consider selling this? And because I saw a really nice 4 inside the show. Like, these are the sorts of things that I enjoy. And some people like looking at cards. Some people like looking and studying sets. And I really enjoy hearing people's opinions on things like this. That's just kind of my thing. And if you're still watching, I'm guessing that it's at least somewhat your thing too, or listening. So my question for this coming week is an interesting one. I think that when we prioritize what we want to buy, right? I'm going to go to Strongsville here pretty soon, and I got to figure out which of these cards you want to buy. One of the things that's always going on in my mind as a collector is, if I've got 100 cards that I want, how am I going to decide which one I'm going to try to target? That's a lot of people have been talking. What are your targets for Strongsville? Like a lot of people making videos about that. A lot of people talking about that, asking that question. What are your targets for Strongsville? And I've got like 100 targets for Strongsville. But which ones am I most likely to go for? Well, I'm most likely to go for if a really nice copy of one of those cards presents itself. But the other part of it, which leads into this question, is I'm usually thinking the card I need to get sooner rather than later is the card that I think might be kind of undervalued at the moment. And when I say undervalued, I mean, it seems like a good deal at the moment, and I think in the not too distant future, it won't always be undervalued. So my question for this week is really that. What is the one thing, and I'm going to be very broad with this, what is the one thing that you think is the most undervalued thing in the hobby? Is it eye appeal, centering? Is it a certain set, a certain player, a certain era, a certain sport, a certain non-sport? What's the thing that you think right now is the most overlooked? Because if you think it's overlooked, it means that, and you don't think it's always going to be overlooked, that means you should probably get it sooner rather than later. So that said, what's that thing for you? Is it a player? If so, who is it? Is it a set? If so, what is it? Is it a release? Is it an era? Is it a sport? Is it a non-sport? Is it a characteristic about a card? Is it a certain type of card? Tell me your thoughts on what you think is the most undervalued thing at the moment. Because if that's the case, then maybe people should kind of go that direction before the prices start to get carried away. Last thing I'll say, I hope that everybody comes out tonight. Again, this is Monday, March 24th, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific for Midlife Live number 3. My panel is awesome. It's going to be absolutely fun. Even if you're not a person who's that into grading, you're a person who's all about raw cards, I still think that you'll have fun and you'll find this to be entertaining. I hope to see you tonight. I know I'm looking forward to it.